It is time for the Writer's Block. I'm Jenny Carlson here in the studios of the Oklahoman, joined by Rob Aller from the Columbus Dispatch, columnist there. Rob, how you doing today?
Hey, great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Glad to have you join us on the Writer's Block here. And segment one today, we've got to start our lead segment with the NFL Draft. Rob, for both of us, both of our markets had a pretty exciting draft night, the first round on Thursday night with Kyler Murray from here in Oklahoma being drafted number 1, then Nick Bosa from Ohio State there in Columbus being taken number 2. What was sort of your impressions of opening night of the NFL Draft?
Well, first, Nashville, man, what a host city, huh? That's they partied it up. Looked like a good time. They'll probably get it again sometime. Music City was excellent. I would say, Nick Bosa here was an interesting story. He was injured in the third game, sat out the rest of the season, partly his decision late in the season just to go train with his brother Joey, who plays for San Diego. And so he was kind of expected to go high at one point, number 1, till Kyler Murray kind of took that from him. And so we went to the Niners, expected. The other Ohio State guy was Dwayne Haskins Jr., the quarterback who a lot of people thought would go to the Giants at 6.
Yep.
And that was a little bit of a shocker. Didn't quite go that way. So, he fell a little. But, I think Ohio State now joins USC, 81 total first-round picks. So that was kind of a storyline here in Columbus.
Yeah. Well, I think that Giants fans might have been a little shocked that Dwayne Haskins wasn't their guy either. I mean, quarterbacks obviously always sort of the talk of the draft, even when defensive players or other players get taken. But, Kyler Murray, the second consecutive number 1 overall pick, taken from Oklahoma, back-to-back Heismans, now back-to-back top first-round draft pick, overall number 1 draft picks for the Sooners. Just felt a little bit like an infomercial for Oklahoma's offense, the lead up to the draft, all the talk about Murray, obviously the reflections on Mayfield and everything that went there. So, if you're a quarterback out there thinking about playing college football and maybe going to the NFL, I got to think Oklahoma looks pretty darn good right now with the track record that they've now started to establish. Obviously, Jalen Hurts, the expected starter next year. Who knows what happens to him? But even if he's not the number 1 overall pick, still to see what happens, how his draft stock, what that looks like in a year will be fascinating. But Rob, I thought you said something really interesting, that crowd in Nashville. They closed down streets. They basically set up an outdoor venue, which when it started raining, I'm sure some people were wondering, is this a good idea? But I heard the number 200,000. People are talking about, is the NFL suffering? Are numbers down? People stood like half a mile away from the stage to watch teams make picks every 10 minutes. That's a pretty good moment for the NFL, I would think.
Yeah, and I think it helps that Nashville's sort of a hot, trendy destination city now. So it wasn't just your, Tennessee fans. I know, Tennessee's a big football state. The Vols haven't been great lately, but they still pack that stadium. But I think this probably drew people from all over because it's Nashville, again, Music City. Tootsie's is there. You can have a pretty good honky tonk good time.
There you go. Yeah, for sure. Well, they took the NFL draft on the road a few years ago, got it out of New York where it had been for so long, but it looks like it's been so successful. Dallas, Chicago, now Nashville. I got to think that the NFL draft may be a roadshow from now on. All right, let's move on to segment 2, and let's go by the numbers. Rob, your number this week is number 1, and that's the spot that John Havlicek holds all-time in scoring in Boston Celtics history. Obviously, everyone knows Havlicek passed away this week, has connections to your neck of the woods, too. I mean, unbelievable career, unbelievable life that he lived.
Yeah, I mean, he's big here in Columbus. He played for Ohio State on their 1960 national championship team. I think for younger people, he's sort of predated Larry Bird. I mean, he was a Larry Bird type of player. Get this number, though. Everyone wants to talk Michael Jordan and his titles. Hondo, which is his nickname, John Havlicek, was 8-0 in NBA Finals.
Wow.
He kind of started the sixth man thing. This terminology of sixth man didn't really exist until he came along and the Celtics used it. And even as a sixth man, he averaged 36 minutes a game. So, all facets. Bill Russell, legendary Bill Russell, said that Havlicek was the best all-around player he ever saw. So, yeah, big deal, just revered in Boston, and a good guy.
Yeah, 26,395 career points. And, for all the Boston Celtics legends that are out there, unbelievable to be at the top of that list, but clearly a great career. I'm going to stay in the NBA, Rob, and I'm going to go with the number 3. That's the consecutive years that the Oklahoma City Thunder have failed to advance beyond the first round of the NBA playoffs. A team that, last year, before the season, they acquire Paul George, and they acquire Carmelo Anthony. A lot of belief that maybe those two guys, in addition to Russell Westbrook, would push the Thunder maybe towards that upper echelon of the West. Maybe they could challenge the Warriors. They don't get out of the first round against the Utah Jazz a year ago. Retool, still have George, still have Westbrook. Play some great basketball at some points during the year, but again, failed to make it out of the first round. Lots of questions around this neck of the woods about what happens in the offseason. Is Billy Donovan going to be retained? Are we going to see some big trades? Potentially even guys sort of at the top of the pecking order might be, made available out there. This is the time of year, Rob, though, that, playoff teams, it exacerbates whether we're talking about NHL, which we'll get to in a minute, or NBA. Teams are always put under the microscope because you can have a really good regular season. We're seeing it right now with the Warriors being pushed. We're seeing it with the Nuggets being pushed. There's a lot of must-see TV in the NBA, but these types of things really magnify teams, and they start to things that look good for 82 games suddenly maybe don't look as good anymore. It's a big challenge in professional sports, Rob.
Absolutely. I don't know if it's a pressure situation or just the makeup. You've got to take it up that next level. And, watching Russell Westbrook, he plays at such a high level during the regular season. I'm not sure, where there is to take it for him. Everybody else maybe raises the level of the game and the opponents. And maybe the Thunder are a little bit like, we'll get to the NHL, the Tampa Bay Lightning, where they're already at a really high level and they just don't go any higher. It's got to be a lot of angst there in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be a very interesting offseason. It's the first offseason in a while that there weren't questions about retaining free agents, but yet there's so many other questions. We'll see what happens in the offseason. All right, let's go to segment number 3. Let's do a report card this week. And Rob, you mentioned the NHL. You mentioned the Lightning before, the team that the Columbus Blue Jackets right there in your town knocked the Lightning out of the playoffs, swept them, a historic team the Lightning were, but they're gone already. Give us a grade for the Jackets so far in the NHL playoffs. Now they're into round 2 against the Boston Bruins.
I'd give them an A- if we can give minuses.
Sure.
It'd be an A with the Lightning. I mean, that was one of the upsets, probably one of the top 10 upsets from a series standpoint in NHL history. Here were the Jackets. A lot of people don't even know where Columbus is, quite honestly. And here comes Tampa Bay with 62 wins, tied for the most ever. The best team of this century, probably. And they get swept by the CBJ. I think it's a classic case of rest versus rust. The Lightning had it wrapped up. They were, they knew they were in the playoffs for about a month beforehand, and just kind of were in coast mode maybe. Get to the playoffs where they say you have to take it up 20%, and they just weren't able to do that. And so here the Jackets sweep them. On the other side of that, the Jackets, sweep that series, and then they have 9 games off before they play Boston. They lost the first game, 3-2 in overtime. And so I think the Columbus showed a lot of rust, didn't quite have the jump that the Bruins had in that game. This is going to be a lot tougher series for Columbus than it was in getting past Tampa Bay.
Yeah, which is crazy because, as you mentioned, that Tampa Bay team, historic in the regular season, and now, possibly a tougher road for Columbus in the second round. But, Rob, I'm curious, what are you hearing from fans there in terms of, how they feel about this team, if they don't survive the second round? I mean, Boston, one of the most historic teams in all of the NHL, if the Jackets don't get past this, is there a feeling of, man, that's disappointing? Or how are sort of people reacting to the idea that, maybe they don't survive another series and they hang their hats on the fact they swept out the Lightning. What's sort of the fan approach to all of that?
Well, just a little bit of a history lesson is the Jackets have been pretty much horrible for the first half of their existence. Had never won an opening playoff round. Had never won a playoff round till this time. So I think if you just look at it from that perspective, everything else is just sort of, cherry on top, whatever they do. That said, I think a lot of experts think that maybe they could go all the way, and the fans are starting to get to that point too. Greed is good in sports, right? So I think there would be some disappointment, but it wouldn't be crushing disappointment.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens Game 2 coming up against the Bruins. My grade is going to be for the Kansas City Chiefs and the NFL, and they're dealing how they've reacted to the Tyreek Hill situation. Kansas City Chief wide receiver used to be at Oklahoma State before he was dismissed from the team up in Stillwater, facing issues related to basically child abuse. The district attorney deciding that they weren't going to press charges, but then an audio comes out, a conversation reported to be between Hill and his fiancée, makes some very disturbing, allegations essentially coming out of this audio that, Tyreek had hurt, had punished their 3-year-old son in some ways that, really, really disturbing. The Chiefs, after their draft night, first round draft night, come out and basically they didn't use the word suspended, Rob, but essentially they said Tyreek Hill's not going to be a part of anything we're doing right now. So he's essentially suspended. But my grade right now is essentially incomplete. I mean, I think that they've taken, both the Chiefs and the NFL have taken let's get as much information as we can. It's the off season. They don't have to rush. They can actually gather all of this. But Rob, I got to tell you, some of the stuff that was in that audio, if the Chiefs and the NFL don't take a serious, whether it's multi-year suspension or an outright ban, I think there's going to be a lot of fans that say, wait a second, you're going to let this type of guy stay in the league? I think they're going to have to do something fairly serious with Tyreek Hill. Yeah,
this is beyond bad optics. I mean, it's one thing you see a lot, well, maybe not a lot, but you see enough of men and football players, domestic abuse of their girlfriends or wives, whatever, and that's bad enough. It's horrible. Then you bring child abuse into it with kids, and again, as the allegations are not good, they've got to do something even before the evidence. I think you set him aside, at least until the evidence is gathered, and I gotta think they're going to come down pretty hard on him, depending what the evidence turns up, I guess.
Yeah, lots probably still to come out about the situation, but it will be interesting as the NFL offseason continues to go. Obviously, in the news with the draft for a couple more days this weekend, so it'll be interesting to see how that story evolves, because the Chiefs are going to be available. Their leadership will be available to the media with this, with draft coverage and that sort of thing. So lots of questions, I'm sure, going to be thrown their way. All right, that's it for the Writer's Block this week. He's Rob. I'm Jenny. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next week.